The morning frost hadn't melted off the porch steps yet when Emily Carter took off her wedding ring for the last time. She didn't cry. She'd already done that 3 nights ago, alone in the barn, when the bank letter arrived with its red stamp and its 30-day deadline. Tonight, she just stood in front of the small mirror in the hallway, turned the gold band once around her finger, and slipped it off. It had been on her hand for 11 years. Through 2 droughts, 1 flood, and the funeral of the man who put it there, she wrapped it in a square of blue cloth, the same fabric she used to swaddle newborn lambs, and drove into town before she could change her mind. By noon, that ring would be gone. By evening, so would everything else she owned. The barn, the fields, the house her husband built with his own hands. Unless a miracle walked through her door in the next 30 days. She had no way of knowing the miracle already had. Because 3 hours earlier, in a downtown office 40 miles away, a man she had never met had opened a folder with her farm's name on it and closed a deal to buy every acre. Cedar Hollow Farm sat on 62 acres at the edge of Millers Creek, Ohio, and for 3 generations it had belonged to the Carter family. Emily's late husband, Daniel, had grown up walking these fields barefoot, and when he married her, he'd carved their initials into the old oak post by the front gate. She still touched that post every morning on her way to the barn, like a small prayer. Daniel had been gone 2 years now. A tractor accident on a rain-slicked hill, the kind of accident everyone in a farming town knows is always one bad afternoon away. Emily had buried him on a Tuesday and by Thursday was back out feeding the cattle because the animals didn't know grief had a schedule. For a while, she'd managed. She had Daniel's life insurance, a small cushion, and more determination than most people twice her size. But 2 years of bad harvests, a hailstorm that flattened her soybean crop, and a barn roof that finally gave out, in a spring storm had eaten through every dollar of that cushion. The final blow came in the form of an envelope from Heritage Trust Bank. Emily remembered exactly how her hands shook opening it. The farm's mortgage, the one Daniel had taken out years ago to buy the neighboring 20 acres, was in default. 30 days to pay $47,000, or the bank would foreclose and auction the land. She'd called her sister that night. Pacing the kitchen with the phone pressed so hard to her ear it left a mark. "Sell it, Em," her sister Rachel said gently. "You fought long enough. Nobody would blame you." "Daniel would blame me," Emily whispered. "Daniel's not here to see you working yourself into the ground." Emily didn't answer that. She hung up, sat at the kitchen table Daniel built from reclaimed barnwood, and stared at her ring for a long time. It was the only thing of real value she still had. An appraiser had once told her, half joking, that the antique setting alone could fetch a decent sum. A family heirloom of Daniel's grandmother's. With a cut of diamond you didn't see much anymore. It wouldn't save the farm. Not the whole $47,000, but it would buy her time, enough to make the first payment, prove good faith to the bank, and keep the wolves from the door a little longer while she figured out the rest. So she made her decision, the way she'd made every hard decision since Daniel died. Alone at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling. Millers Creek didn't have much downtown left. A hardware store, a diner, a church, and Whitfield's Jewelry and Loan, which had quietly become the town's pawn shop of last resort for anyone going through a hard season. Emily had passed that shop 1,000 times without ever thinking she'd walk through its door for this reason. Old Mr. Whitfield had known Daniel since he was a boy. When Emily set the small blue cloth bundle on the counter and unwrapped it, his face fell. "Emily, honey, are you sure about this?" "I need $11,000, Mr. Whitfield. I need it by Friday." He turned the ring over in the light, examining the setting, the stone, the small engraving inside the band that read D&E, "Forever Rooted," a nod to the farm they'd built their life on. "I can give you 9, he said quietly. "That's fair market, maybe a hair over. I wish I could do more. $9,000. It wasn't enough. Not nearly. But it was something, and something was more than the nothing she'd have in 30 days if she did nothing at all. "I'll take it," she said, and signed the paper before her hands could shake again. Driving home with the check in her purse, Emily allowed herself exactly 1 red light's worth of tears. Then she wiped her face because there was a fence to mend and calves to feed, and grief, like everything else on a farm, had to wait its turn. What she didn't know was that Mr. Whitfield, moved by the sight of a widow selling her wedding ring to keep a dying farm alive, had made a phone call of his own that same afternoon. A call to a man named Nathan Cole, a name that, in 3 weeks, would mean everything to Emily, though she had no idea who he was yet. This is the open loop. Hold on to that name. Everything that happens next traces back to this one phone call. Nathan Cole was not what anyone in Millers Creek expected. At 38, he'd built a modest but respected agricultural investment firm out of Columbus, the kind of company that bought struggling farms not to bulldoze them for subdivisions, like the predatory developers everyone feared, but to restructure their debt, invest in the land, and often keep the original families on as operators. It wasn't purely charity. Nathan had learned the hard way, growing up on his own family's failed dairy farm in Vermont, that a farm lost to foreclosure was a wound that never fully closed, for the family, and often for the town around it. He'd watched his own father hand over the keys to a bank representative when Nathan was 12 years old, and something in him had decided, right then, that he would spend his adult life making sure other families didn't have to feel that same particular kind of shame. Mr. Whitfield's call had come through an old friend, a mutual contact from an agricultural lending seminar years back, who mentioned that Whitfield sometimes flagged struggling local farms to conscientious buyers, hoping to steer them away from predatory land grabs. When Whitfield described Emily's situation, a young widow, a proud but crumbling 62-acre farm, a ring sold out of desperation, something about it struck a nerve in Nathan he couldn't quite explain. He drove out to Millers Creek himself the next morning, unannounced, telling no one who he was. He parked at the edge of the property, out of sight of the farmhouse, and simply walked the fence line for nearly an hour. He noted the good bones of the land, the healthy topsoil, the well-maintained irrigation ditch Daniel had dug years back, the solid foundation of the barn beneath its storm-damaged roof. He noted, too, the small handmade sign nailed to the gatepost, Cedar Hollow Farm, Esther 1961, rebuilt with love. By the time Nathan got back in his truck, he'd made his decision. He called Heritage Trust Bank that same afternoon and made an offer that surprised even the loan officer. He would purchase the entire outstanding mortgage debt directly from the bank, all $47,000 of it, and restructure it privately, at far more forgiving terms than any bank would ever offer a homeowner in foreclosure. In banking terms, he had bought the note. In plain terms, he now legally held Emily Carter's debt. He owned the paper on her farm. He did not yet own her trust. And he knew that was going to be the harder thing to win. 10 days after she pawned her ring, Emily was up on a ladder trying, badly, to patch the section of barn roof that had finally split open, when a black pickup truck she didn't recognize pulled into her driveway. A man got out, tall, dressed plainly, nothing about him suggesting money except the quiet confidence in how he walked. Emily climbed down, wiping her hands on her jeans, immediately on guard. Strangers didn't drive out to Cedar Hollow unless they were selling something, or, worse, hear about the debt. "Can I help you?" She called, arms crossed. "Nathan Cole," he said, extending a hand she didn't take. "I need to talk to you about your loan." Her stomach dropped. "Are you from the bank?" "Not exactly. I bought your mortgage from the bank 3 days ago." For a moment, Emily just stared at him, waiting for the rest of the sentence to make sense. "You bought it? You bought my debt? Why would anyone do that?" "Because I think this farm is worth saving," Nathan said simply. "And because the terms the bank was about to hold you to would have buried you even if you scraped together the first payment. I want to offer you different terms." Emily's first instinct, a sharp, protective instinct honed by 2 years of surviving alone, was suspicion. "What's the catch? You want the land? You're one of those investment guys who flips farms into vacation properties?" "No," Nathan said. "I want to give you room to breathe and a repayment plan you can actually survive. I don't want your farm, Mrs. Carter. I want it to still be your farm 10 years from now." She didn't believe him. Not that day. She told him politely but firmly that she'd think about it, and watched from the porch as his truck disappeared down the gravel road, dust rising behind it in the late afternoon light. That night, she called Rachel again. "Some stranger bought my mortgage," Emily said, still stunned. "Says he wants to help." "I don't trust it." "Maybe," Rachel said carefully. "Not everything that shows up uninvited is here to hurt you." Emily didn't sleep much that night. She kept thinking about the way Nathan had looked at the barn roof before he ever looked at her, like he'd already noticed the split beam, the missing shingles, the years of neglect she couldn't afford to fix. Like he'd actually seen the farm, not just the debt attached to it. Nathan didn't push. That more than anything was what slowly wore down Emily's guard. He sent the new loan paperwork through a lawyer, not in person, giving her space to review it without pressure. The terms were by any measure extraordinarily fair: extended repayment, reduced interest, and a 6-month grace period before the first payment was even due. Emily had her own lawyer, a cousin twice removed who did real estate law in Columbus, look over every line. He called her back within a day, audibly surprised. "Emily, I don't know who this guy is, but these terms are almost too good. There's no trap in here that I can find." She signed the papers on a Thursday, still half convinced she'd wake up and find some hidden clause. She didn't. 2 weeks later, a construction crew showed up at Cedar Hollow, sent, they explained by Nathan Cole, to repair the barn roof at his own cost, as part of protecting the collateral, though Emily suspected that was a polite fiction. The real reason revealed itself when Nathan came out personally to check on the work and ended up, sleeves rolled up, helping carry lumber alongside the crew for 2 hours in the July heat, without a word of complaint. "You don't have to do this," Emily told him, handing him a glass of water on the porch. "I know," he said. "I want to." Over the following weeks, something shifted, slowly, the way seasons shift on a farm, not all at once, but in small, undeniable degrees. Nathan started coming out on weekends, first to check on repairs, then simply because he'd started to care what happened to the place. And though neither of them said it aloud yet, to the woman running it, he fixed fences. He drove into town with her to negotiate better feed prices with a supplier he happened to know. He sat at her kitchen table, Daniel's table, one evening in August and listened. Really listened as she told him stories about Daniel, about building this life from nothing, about the ring she'd sold to buy herself 30 more days. "I know about the ring," Nathan admitted quietly that night. "Whitfield told the friend who told me. That's part of why I came out here in the first place." Emily went very still. "You bought my farm because of my ring?" "I bought your farm," Nathan corrected gently. "Because a woman who would sell the last thing she had left of her husband, just to buy herself time to keep fighting for their land, that's not someone who deserves to lose it to a bank spreadsheet. That's someone worth betting on." Emily didn't know what to say to that. So for the first time in 2 years, she let herself cry in front of another person and didn't apologize for it. Autumn came, and with it, the harvest Emily had feared she'd never get to bring in on Cedar Hollow soil. The soybeans came back strong. The cattle fattened well. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily Carter watched her fields fill with gold and didn't feel the cold dread of a bank letter waiting at the end of the season. It was Nathan, in October, who finally told her the rest of what he'd done, the piece he'd been quietly holding back. "There's something else," he said one evening, as they walked the fence line together in the fading light, the same fence line he'd walked alone, uninvited, all those months ago. "When I bought the note from the bank, I didn't just restructure your debt. I paid it off in full, out of my own funds, 2 months ago. You've had 0 outstanding balance on this farm since August." Emily stopped walking. "What? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to think any of this," he gestured between them, "was about the debt, or about gratitude, or about you owing me something. I wanted you to have time to decide how you felt about me, not about what I did for the farm. So the farm is paid off, free and clear?" "Free and clear," Nathan confirmed. "It was never really mine to hold on to, Emily. I just wanted to buy you enough time to save it yourself. Which you did, every single day since, with your own 2 hands. The stranger who'd bought her mortgage, town gossip had said for months, must have some angle, some hidden agenda. The way any outsider with money always seemed to in a town like Miller's Creek. But the truth, when it finally came out at the county fair that October, because small towns cannot keep a secret past harvest season, was almost embarrassingly simple. A man who'd lost his own family's farm as a boy had spent his adult life trying to make sure other families never had to feel that same loss. And in trying to save Emily Carter's 62 acres, he'd ended up finding something he never expected to find at all. The following spring, on the 1-year anniversary of the day she'd walked into Whitfield's jewelry and loan, Emily received a small package on her porch, wrapped unexpectedly, in a square of blue cloth. Inside was her wedding ring. She stood frozen on the porch steps, turning it over in her palm exactly as she had the day she took it off. "Nathan, waiting by the gatepost where Daniel had carved his and Emily's initials all those years ago. Explained quietly that he'd gone to Whitfield's the week after he first met her, quietly bought the ring back, and had been keeping it safe ever since, waiting for a day when giving it back would mean something more than pity and less than pressure. He'd wanted her to choose on her own terms and in her own time what that ring and what he meant to her going forward. "I'm not asking you to wear it the way you did before," Nathan said carefully. "Daniel gave you that ring, and that's yours. That love is yours. I just didn't think something that meant forever rooted to you should end up in some stranger's jewelry case." Emily looked down at the ring, then up at the man standing by her gate, the stranger who had bought her debt, her time, and somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing when, a place in her life she hadn't been sure she'd ever make room for again. She didn't put the ring back on that day. Instead, she had it reset months later. The diamond moved to a simple pendant she wore close to her heart, a way of carrying Daniel and Cedar Hollow with her always, without closing the door on whatever came next. What came next, as it turned out, was a second life at Cedar Hollow Farm, one neither of them could have predicted the morning Emily sold her ring, believing she was giving up the last good thing she owned. Some people think selling your wedding ring means giving up. She was about to gain everything she never knew she needed. For Emily Carter, it was the first step toward a farm, a future, and a love story she never saw coming. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments. Would you have trusted the stranger who bought your debt? And if you want more stories like this one, real sacrifice, real second chances, real love, subscribe, because next week's story might just be the one that stays with you longest.